Well, the latest financial blow to the EU comes from Moody's. The ratings agency has changed the bloc's outlook from stable to negative, warning it faces being downgraded. For more on the subject, let's now talk live with Morten Messerschmidt, Danish MEP and member of the Europe of Freedom and Democracy group in the European Parliament. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mr. Messerschmidt. Now, Moody said its decision to switch the bloc's ratings outlook reflected issues the EU's richest members are dealing with. What are those leading countries really doing wrong?
Well, basically, the entire euro construction is wrong because it's trying to encompass so many different economies, and it's getting increasingly more and more clear that it's not possible to have a common currency with so relatively different kinds of financial policies, labor market policies, pension policies, and therefore one has to unify Europe to create a federation. Basically, that's what all this is about, a political federation which the Europeans predominantly don't wish, and then of course a fiscal federation where the ECB is buying up the bonds, where everybody has to be liable to other countries' debts and so on. So basically this is a construction that is collapsing as I see it.
Now, today's meeting of France's François Hollande and Italy's Mario Monti is only one of several this week between European leaders, and so far they don't seem to be bearing fruit. How do you see the situation resolving?
Well, the most recent crisis, or the crisis first to come, is this Thursday when Spain is issuing bonds of a worth €3.5 billion, and it's quite obvious that no one in the private market wants to buy these bonds, at least not for an interest rate which is regarded as within the frame of what is acceptable for Spain. So now the ECB is going to once again buy up these bonds. And that's the major point of discussion here right now between, of course, Germany, Draghi, and other of the major countries, whether it's a stable policy to have the ECB constantly buying up the bonds, which nobody in the free market wants. Basically, that's just a sign of the illness of the euro, that the economies are so unstable that you need to have a public foundation like the ECB to support the economies which need it. Normally, in a normal economy, they would simply be refinancing their debt on the private market, but it doesn't work in the Eurozone, and that of course is the major concerns of those people who have invented this thing.
Now, Bulgaria is the latest country to put on hold its plans to join the common currency. Could that also be seen as a sign that the euro may indeed collapse?
Well, right now it's not the time to talk about more countries joining the euro. It's more relevant to talk about which countries would be the first to leave the euro. We saw the other day that Slovenia is now planning for their public sector, for their economy to go bankrupt. We know that in Finland they are working on a plan. What will they do when countries begin to leave the eurozone? Actually, the best thing that could happen for many of the countries within the euro, especially in the south, would be to leave the euro and devaluate and thereby reignite their economy. But talking about new countries coming into the euro is entirely unrealistic as long as we are where we are now, where the Europeans in general refuse to give up the sovereignty to Brussels, which is necessary in order for making the euro work, and where it's obvious that the taxpayers around, especially in the north, are fed up with paying for debt that they didn't build up themselves.
Certainly, you do make some very valid points, but I do want to draw your attention to recent leaked emails with claims of the troika of international lenders wanting Greece, which is one of the most debt-stricken countries, to work 6 days a week and longer hours to fulfill their financial obligations. Do you think, in fact, that could be applied?
Well, there are two important points to be made here. First of all, this just proves once again what the euro is about, that more political decisions are to be taken by people who are not elected, for instance in Greece, but political decisions being imposed on the Greeks by people who are not elected there. That's the first political point, which is important. The second one, and that's the more sad one actually, is that it's not going to work, because the differences between the north and the south in the eurozone are simply so big that even though you make make the Greeks work 6 days a week, the debt level and the differences in level of competition between the countries are not of a degree where it makes sense to have a common exchange rate, and that's what you have when you have a common currency. So even though that you might push the Greeks into these dramatic reforms, it's not going to rescue the euro. The only thing that's going to rescue the Greeks is to abolish the euro, abolish the country from the Eurozone.
Now, many experts do believe that the bailout system is the reason why the EU is in such poor economic state. How could the need for them be avoided?
Well, right now what we're waiting for basically regarding Greece, I think for the ESM, the European Stability Mechanism, to be approved by the German High Court. When that's in order, and that's expected within the coming 2 weeks, then the juridical instrument will be there for removing bad lending, bad bonds from the private banks onto the taxpayers. Then I think Merkel and others will accept, when this economical risk is taken away from her bank, the German banks, to let Greece go. That's going to be a rumble period of time, of course, but it's the only way to go, I think, for reignite the Greek economy. And there's an important example to look at. For instance, Iceland, which for a couple of years ago was in a similar economical catastrophic situation, but they did the quite opposite of what EU is imposing the Euro member states to do. They let the banks go bankrupt instead of persuading the taxpayers to bail them out. They devaluated their currency, and today Iceland is emerging. Well, it's a sparkling star on a grey sky in Europe. I think the same cure could be adaptable for instance, Greece or Spain or Portugal, but it can never happen as long as they are in this prison of the Eurozone. So I'm not going to give any suggestions for what can be done of political changes within the Eurozone and the Euro structure to solve the problems, because it's the very structure itself that's wrong.
All right, Morten Messerschmidt, Danish MEP and a member of the Europe of Freedom and Democracy group in the European Parliament. Thank you for your insight and your time.
My pleasure.